John pulled into his driveway just as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across his quiet suburban street. It had been a long weekend away, a chance to escape the humdrum of daily life and recharge. But the moment he stepped out of his car, something felt wrong. His heart tightened at the sight of a crisp, official-looking notice pinned firmly to his front door. The white paper fluttered slightly in the breeze, its bold header reading, "Notice of Property Reassignment." John frowned, brow furrowed. As he reached out and peeled the notice from the door, it was signed by Karen Evans, a woman John had heard about from neighbors, the HOA's chairwoman, infamous for her sharp tongue and iron grip on their small community. But this was something new. The notice declared that a portion of John's backyard, a patch of green where his kids had played and where he had planted his rose bushes, was now designated as common HOA property and no longer part of his deed. The letter threatened fines and legal action if John refused to acknowledge the reassignment. John blinked, staring at the words. "That can't be right," he muttered. "How can they just take part of my yard?" His mind raced. Had he missed some HOA meeting? Was there some new rule? But why hadn't anyone mentioned it? And why now? He tried calling the HOA office immediately. The phone rang several times before a clipped voice answered. "This is Linda at the HOA office. How can I help you?" John's voice was steady but laced with urgency. "Hi, Linda. I just got a notice saying part of my backyard is now community property. I don't recall approving anything like that. Can you explain?" There was a pause on the other end, a faint hesitation before she replied. "Oh yes, that's part of our updated community boundaries. It's standard procedure to notify homeowners. You should have received previous communications." John's confusion deepened. "Previous communications? I didn't get any letters or emails. This is the first I'm hearing of it." Linda's tone hardened just a touch. "Our records show notifications were sent. You might want to check your mail more carefully." John frowned. "I have. Nothing came. And why exactly is this change happening?" "We're simply formalizing common spaces, sir. It's all within the HOA's authority," Linda said briskly, ending the call before John could ask more. The sense of unease settled heavy in John's chest. Something about her evasiveness didn't sit right. He stepped inside and sat at his kitchen table, the notice folded neatly in front of him. His gaze drifted to the backyard visible through the window, his children's swing set, the garden he had painstakingly nurtured. How could that be taken away? His phone buzzed. A message from his wife, Sarah. "Got your message, what's going on?" John typed back quickly. "I got a notice from Karen. She's trying to claim part of our yard for the HOA. This doesn't feel right." Minutes later, his phone rang. It was Mark, his next-door neighbor and longtime friend. "John, I heard about the notice. You're not the first. Karen's been pushing these reassignments quietly for weeks," Mark said, voice low. "Some people are too scared to push back." John frowned. "Scared? Why?" Mark sighed. "Karen's got power. Board meetings aren't exactly democratic. If you ask too many questions, things get difficult." John clenched his jaw. "I'm not going to let her steal what's mine." The night crept in, but John's mind was wide awake, spinning through possibilities. Was this really a bureaucratic blunder? Or a deliberate land grab cloaked in HOA paperwork? He knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let Karen win without a fight. The next morning, John woke with a restless energy. He couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's claim was just the tip of a deeper problem lurking beneath the surface of his quiet neighborhood. Determined to get to the bottom of it, he set off to the county records office with a stack of paperwork and a steely resolve. The county clerk's office smelled of old paper and worn wood, the air thick with the hum of fluorescent lights and quiet murmurs. John approached the records desk, his eyes scanning the rows of filing cabinets and digital terminals. He explained his situation, that he needed the official property maps and deed records for his address and the surrounding parcels. An attendant led him to a computer terminal where John carefully pulled up the property map and the deed associated with his home. He printed the documents, then cross-checked the property lines marked on his deed against the HOA's official boundary map, the one included in the notice Karen had sent. His stomach dropped. The lines didn't match. The HOA map showed a chunk of his backyard shaded as common property, but John's deed clearly included that same section as private land. He flipped through additional documents, but the discrepancies grew worse. Some maps looked older and official, others appeared newer but lacked any proper signatures or date stamps. One document, supposedly signed by a previous homeowner, was smudged and barely legible. John leaned back in his chair, a cold knot tightening in his gut. "Something's not right," he whispered. As he continued searching, John noticed several folders marked as confidential, something unusual, for public records. With the clerk's permission, he requested access, but the clerk hesitated, glancing nervously around before replying, "Those files are restricted due to an ongoing investigation." The words hit John like a punch. Investigation? His mind flashed to Karen's evasive phone call and the vague threats from neighbors. The quiet community he thought he knew was suddenly shadowed in secrecy. Determined, John asked if there was any way to get more information about the investigation. The clerk shook her head but suggested, "You might try the HOA's board meeting minutes. They're public record, though you might have to sift through a lot of jargon." Back at home, John dove into the online archives of the HOA website, downloading meeting minutes from the past 2 years. As he scanned through dense paragraphs, his eyes caught phrases like boundary adjustments, community space reallocation, and unanimous board approval. But one set of minutes stood out, a meeting from just 3 months ago where Karen pushed for revising property lines to increase HOA common areas. The vote was noted as unanimous, but John remembered the evasive tone at the office. Had all homeowners really been informed? More troubling was a cryptic reference to correcting discrepancies in land surveys without elaboration. John's phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah. "Anything new?" He typed back quickly. "Looks like Karen has been quietly redrawing property lines. Some documents don't add up, and there's a confidential investigation." The phone rang almost immediately. It was Mark, his neighbor. "John, I heard some rumors. Karen's been meeting late at night with certain contractors and lawyers. They say she's trying to consolidate land for a big development project that would profit the HOA board members personally." John's jaw clenched. "That explains a lot. But I need proof." Mark's voice dropped. "Be careful, John. People who've tried to challenge Karen have faced threats, and worse." John swallowed hard but replied firmly, "I'm not backing down." Late into the night, John reviewed more maps, deeds, and meeting notes. He noticed something strange. Dates on some HOA documents were altered, signatures missing or looking suspiciously similar. His pulse quickened. Had the HOA been forging documents to legitimize their claims? As John closed his laptop, the shadows outside his window seemed to thicken. A cold draft brushed past, as if warning him the deeper he dug, the more dangerous his fight would become. But John was ready. Whatever it took, he would prove the HOA's claims were fraud and protect what was rightfully his. John's discoveries weighed heavily on his mind as the days passed, but he knew he couldn't face this alone. The next logical step was to talk to those who had lived through the HOA's changes longer than he had. His neighbors. One late afternoon, John decided to visit Mrs. Reynolds, the elderly woman who lived a few houses down the street. She was known to keep to herself, rarely seen at community events, but also known to possess a sharp memory and a wary eye for the HOA's inner workings. He rang her doorbell and waited. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a frail but alert woman with piercing eyes. After a brief introduction, John explained his situation, careful not to alarm her, but eager for any insight she might offer. Mrs. Reynolds's face tightened. "I've seen this before, John," she said quietly, ushering him inside. "Karen's tactics are not new to this neighborhood. She and a few others on the board have been quietly redrawing property lines for years, slowly swallowing up homeowners' land." John's eyes widened. "But how? How do they get away with it?" Mrs. Reynolds lowered her voice. "It's all in the documents. They falsify meeting minutes, forge signatures, and pressure people into silence. A lot of folks are afraid to speak up, especially those with families or financial troubles." John leaned forward, heart pounding. "Has anyone ever tried to fight back?" She shook her head slowly. "A few tried, but the HOA retaliated. Some received anonymous threats, others were hit with ridiculous fines or dragged into costly legal battles. It's designed to break you down." John swallowed hard but asked, "Is there any proof? Something concrete I could use?" Mrs. Reynolds nodded, moving cautiously to a dusty filing cabinet. She pulled out a worn folder labeled HOA Secrets. Inside were yellowed papers, old meeting notes, handwritten letters, and faded maps, all showing discrepancies in property claims, strange boundary changes, and records of late-night special meetings that had never been publicized. "There," she whispered. "This is what Karen doesn't want anyone to find." John carefully examined the documents. One letter, unsigned but clearly written, by a concerned homeowner, detailed a suspicious land deal involving the HOA and a local developer. Another map showed a parcel of land mysteriously reclassified as common property without homeowner consent. A chill ran down John's spine. The folder was a damning testament to years of deception. Mrs. Reynolds looked at him gravely. "If you want to take this to court, you'll need more than these papers. You'll need witnesses, experts, and someone who can expose the forgeries." John nodded, feeling the weight of the fight ahead. "I'm ready." Just then, a faint knock echoed from the door. Mrs. Reynolds froze, eyes narrowing. "Who could that be at this hour?" she whispered. John peered through the window blinds and saw a shadow retreating down the street. His heart leapt. "Someone's watching us," he said, voice low. Mrs. Reynolds nodded solemnly. "They don't want this information out. Be careful, John. They'll come after you." As John left her home that evening, the sun dipping below the horizon, his mind raced. The neighborhood he'd once felt safe in now seemed cloaked in menace and secrets. He realized Karen's reach was wider and darker than he had imagined. Driving home, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." John's grip tightened on the steering wheel. The stakes had just been raised, and the quiet battle for his property was about to become a war. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening in the community center. A modest building with beige walls and flickering fluorescent lights, the perfect place for tense exchanges disguised as polite discussions. John arrived early, clutching a folder thick with copies of the documents Mrs. Reynolds had shared and the maps he'd painstakingly collected. His pulse raced, every step heavier as he entered the room and spotted Karen already seated near the front, flanked by a group of board members who gave him cold, calculating stares. Karen's eyes locked onto his the moment he stepped in. A slow, knowing smile curled at the corner of her lips, as if she relished the showdown to come. The room filled quickly, neighbors taking their seats with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. John felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. As the meeting began, the HOA president announcing the agenda with practiced ease. When it was John's turn, he stood and addressed the crowd, his voice steady but firm. "I'm here because I believe our HOA board has been acting beyond its authority, altering property boundaries without homeowner consent. I have evidence of forged documents and unauthorized meetings." A murmur rippled through the room. Karen raised a hand to interrupt, voice sharp and cutting. "That's a baseless accusation. These claims are reckless and threaten to destabilize our community." John met her gaze unflinchingly. "This isn't about destabilizing anything. It's about protecting the rights of homeowners." "We deserve transparency," Karen sneered. "You're stirring trouble where none exists. Maybe you're just trying to cover your own mistakes." John felt the room's temperature drop. The board members exchanged glances, and John noticed a few discreet nods from the crowd, some fearful, others resentful. Suddenly the lights flickered and then went out, plunging the room into darkness. A startled gasp rose from the audience. The emergency lights buzzed on weakly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Karen's face was momentarily lost in the dim glow before she smirked again, clearly amused. "Technical difficulties," she said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let's take a short recess." The break felt like a lifetime. Whispers filled the air as neighbors speculated about the sudden blackout. When the lights returned, John moved to place a critical document on the table, a copy of a meeting minute proving the HOA board's unanimous vote on boundary changes. But as he reached for it, his hand froze. The paper was gone. John's breath hitched. Karen's eyes gleamed triumphantly. "Looks like someone's trying to sabotage the meeting," she said, voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I suggest we proceed with caution." John's mind raced. Had someone stolen the document during the blackout? Who else was involved in this? Despite the disruption, John pressed on, recounting the evidence he'd gathered, describing the forged signatures, the altered maps, and the secret meetings. But Karen interrupted constantly, dismissing each point as misinformation or hearsay. At one moment, she leaned in close and whispered, loud enough for John to hear, "You're making a dangerous mistake." John met her threat with quiet defiance. "The truth will come out." After hours of heated debate, the meeting adjourned, with no resolution, but with an unspoken warning hanging in the air. John had poked a hornet's nest. Driving home, the weight of the night settled on him. He knew Karen's board wouldn't stop at intimidation. They would escalate. That night, a shadow moved near John's porch. A car slowly cruised past his house, headlights dimmed. John's phone buzzed again with a new message. "Back off," or "face consequences." The note was chilling and clear. But John's resolve only hardened. He wasn't just fighting for his backyard anymore. He was fighting for justice, and the truth, no matter how dangerous, had to be uncovered. John's resolve was unshaken, but the warnings were becoming harder to ignore. The quiet intimidation tactics weren't just messages on his phone or mysterious cars creeping past his home. They were a clear signal that Karen and her allies wouldn't back down easily. Still, John knew he couldn't fight alone. If he wanted to stop the HOA's encroachment, he needed allies, people who shared his concerns but were too afraid to speak out. The next morning, John began a door-to-door campaign, clipboard in hand, ready to listen. The first few neighbors he approached were hesitant, eyes darting nervously as if worried about being seen talking to him. Some shook their heads, whispering about Karen's influence and how she controlled everything. But not everyone was silent. At Mrs. Patel's house, an elderly woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, John found an unexpected supporter. She invited him in, revealing a stack of letters she'd written to the HOA over the past year, all ignored or dismissed. Her small backyard, once her pride and joy, had already been partly fenced off under the HOA's new boundary lines. "I'm scared, John," she admitted softly. "But I don't want to lose my home either. Maybe if we stand together, we can make a difference." John nodded, heart swelling with hope. Next, he met the Ramirez family, young parents who had recently moved in. They'd been blindsided by the same property reassignment notice and were frustrated by the lack of transparency. They agreed to join John's cause and even offered to host an informal neighborhood meeting in their backyard. Word spread quickly. Over the next week, more neighbors stepped forward. Those who had quietly suffered from sudden fines, boundary changes, and the HOA's harsh penalties. Some shared stories of phone calls from Karen that turned threatening when they questioned her decisions. John took detailed notes and photographs of altered fences, mismatched boundary markers, and official letters with suspicious dates. He knew the mounting evidence would be vital if the fight moved into the courtroom. At the Ramirez's backyard gathering, about 20 residents gathered under strings of twinkling lights, faces a mix of worry and determination. John stood at the center, presenting the documents, the maps, and the stories he'd collected. "We've all been affected," he said firmly. "Karen and the board have been acting in secret, manipulating rules and boundaries for their own benefit. It's time we demand transparency and accountability," the crowd murmured in agreement. Sarah stood by John's side, holding their youngest child. Her calm strength bolstered him more than words could say. One man, a retired lawyer, named Greg, stepped forward. "I've reviewed some of these documents. There's enough here to challenge the HOA legally, but we need a formal homeowners coalition to present a united front." John's eyes lit up. "Let's form that coalition. We can pool resources, share legal fees, and support each other through this." As the night deepened, the neighborhood, that had once been fractured by fear and silence, began to knit together with purpose and courage. John could almost feel the walls closing in on Karen's scheme. But even as hope blossomed, John remained wary. He knew Karen wouldn't take this lying down. The next moves would be crucial and dangerous. Before leaving the gathering, Greg pulled John aside. "If you want to expose their fraud fully, you'll need hard proof. Contracts, bank records, anything that shows who benefits financially from these changes." John nodded slowly, already forming a plan. The fight was far from over, but for the first time since the notice appeared, he didn't feel alone. Outside, the night was quiet, but in John's heart, a storm was building, one that could shake the foundations of their entire community. With the newly formed Homeowners Coalition behind him, John felt a renewed sense of purpose. Yet the words Greg had spoken haunted him. "You'll need hard proof, contracts, bank records, anything that shows who benefits financially." That kind of evidence was rarely handed over freely, especially by a board as cunning as Karen's. John decided to start where Karen's influence was strongest, the HOA's financial records. He filed a formal request for the HOA's recent budgets and expenditures, invoking the state's public records law. Days later, he received a thick envelope filled with dozens of pages, an avalanche of numbers, vague line items, and cryptic notes. At first glance, the records seemed innocuous, routine expenses for landscaping, maintenance, legal fees. But as John pored over the pages late into the night, patterns emerged. Large sums had been paid to unfamiliar contractors, companies that seemed to exist only on paper. Payments for land development services matched suspicious dates of boundary changes. One entry stood out, a hefty transfer to a local REAL, a state firm with ties to several HOA board members. John's heart raced. Was Karen and her allies quietly profiting from the very land they were trying to claim? The following day, John enlisted the help of Greg, the retired lawyer, to interpret the financial jargon. Together, they traced payments and cross-referenced contractor names with public business registrations. "Look at this," Greg said, pointing to a document on John's laptop. "This company was dissolved 2 years ago, yet payments were made to it months after that." John frowned. "Phantom companies. Classic money laundering or fraud tactic." Greg nodded gravely. "If we can link these payments directly to board members, it'll be a smoking gun." But there was more. While scanning through digital correspondence he'd managed to hack from a less secure HOA member's email, he had a contact inside the board willing to risk anonymity. John discovered encrypted messages hinting at land, consolidation deals, and quiet acquisitions. The tone was casual, as if these illicit plans were routine. The anonymous contact warned John in one message. "They're covering tracks faster than we can see. Watch your back." That night, John sat alone in his dimly lit study, connecting the dots like pieces of a puzzle. The forged documents, the altered maps, the clandestine meetings, the blackouts, the threats. It all pointed to a well-oiled scheme designed to strip homeowners of their land and funnel profits to a select few. His phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. "Meet me at the old gazebo in the park. Midnight, come alone." John's pulse quickened. Was this a trap? Or a chance to gain the critical evidence he needed? After pacing the room for a long minute, he made up his mind. He couldn't let fear dictate his actions. The truth was too important. At midnight, under a cloudy sky, John slipped quietly to the park. The old gazebo was eerily still, the only sound the rustle of leaves in the breeze. A shadow detached itself from the darkness. A woman stepped forward, face obscured by a hood. "You're brave to come," she whispered. "I'm the one who sent the emails. There's more. Documents hidden in the HOA's storage shed. Original deeds, contracts, proof of falsified signatures." John's breath caught. "Why are you helping me?" She hesitated. "Because I was part of it once. I can't live with the guilt anymore." Before he could ask more, a sudden sound shattered the silence. A car engine roaring to life nearby. The woman's eyes widened in fear. "You have to get out of here. Now!" John sprinted back toward his car as headlights swept across the park. He glanced back once, catching a glimpse of a black SUV peeling away into the night. Heart pounding, John realized that uncovering the HOA's darkest secrets was far more dangerous than he'd imagined. But now, with a potential trove of physical evidence waiting to be uncovered, he had the chance to turn the tide. The battle for his property and his neighborhood's future was about to enter its most perilous phase yet. The dawn was barely breaking when John sat in his car, heart still pounding from the midnight rendezvous. His mind raced with the secret his anonymous ally had revealed. The original deeds and contracts hidden somewhere in the HOA's storage shed. That could be the evidence that finally exposed Karen's web of lies. He knew what he had to do, but the risk was enormous. The storage shed was locked tight, guarded by surveillance cameras and, no doubt, monitored by Karen's cronies. Still, if the coalition was going to have a real chance in court, John couldn't back down now. He waited until late evening, when most of the neighborhood had settled into sleep. The street was silent under the thick cloak of night. John parked his car a few houses down from the community center where the storage shed was located. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out a flashlight and a small toolkit he'd borrowed from a friend. Slow, careful steps brought him to the shed's side door. The security cameras were positioned near the entrance, but he'd noticed during the last meeting a blind spot just behind a large oak tree. John slipped into the shadow, watching the faint red glow of the camera lights blink away from his position. The lock was old but sturdy. He worked meticulously to pick it, every second stretched taut with tension. After what felt like an eternity, a soft click confirmed success. The door creaked open, and a wave of musty air greeted him. Inside, rows of metal shelves groaned under the weight of dusty boxes and forgotten files. John's flashlight beam scanned the clutter, searching for anything labeled deeds, contracts, or property records. Suddenly, he spotted a locked filing cabinet in the corner, its paint chipped and faded. The cabinet was chained, but John's toolkit held bolt cutters, and with careful pressure, he snapped the chain. Inside, Neatly stacked folders bore the HOA's seal. His fingers trembled as he pulled out a thick folder marked Property Transfers, 2018-2024. Flipping through, John's eyes widened. Here were the original deeds, some with suspicious amendments, handwritten notes in different ink, forged signatures, and boundary maps that didn't match the official surveys. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked behind him. John froze. "Who's there?" he whispered, voice barely audible. A shadow emerged from the darkness, a tall figure moving quickly toward him. Panic surged through John's veins as he grabbed the folder and bolted toward the door. Footsteps thundered behind him, closing the gap fast. John's heart hammered as he sprinted out into the night, clutching the precious documents. He could hear the figure shouting orders, a voice chilling in its fury. "Stop him! Don't let him get away!" Bursting into the street, John didn't look back. He darted between parked cars, adrenaline pushing him beyond exhaustion. Just as he reached his car, headlights flooded the street. A black SUV blocked his path, tires screeching to a halt. John's chest tightened. From the passenger seat, Karen emerged, her expression dark and triumphant. "Going somewhere, John?" she hissed, stepping forward. John clutched the folder tighter. "I'm done being your victim, Karen. I have the proof. The truth is coming. Out." Karen smiled coldly. "You're playing a dangerous game. You don't know who you're messing with." Before she could reach him, a sudden blare of car horns erupted from behind the SUV. Out of nowhere, a convoy of coalition members' vehicles rolled up, headlights blazing. Greg, Sarah, Mrs. Patel, and others spilled out, surrounding Karen and her cohorts. "Step back, Karen," Greg commanded, voice steady. "This ends tonight." Karen's smile faltered, her eyes flickering with rage and fear. She glanced around, realizing she was outnumbered. John exhaled deeply, the tension breaking like a dam. The coalition had arrived just in time. In the days that followed, the evidence John had risked everything to secure was handed to the coalition's legal team. The forged documents, financial records, and original deeds painted an undeniable picture of fraud and corruption. Karen and the HOA board faced investigations, lawsuits, and public scrutiny. The neighborhood that once lived in fear was now united, armed with truth and courage. John stood on his porch one evening, watching children play freely in the street, feeling a profound sense of relief and determination. The fight wasn't over, but the balance of power had shifted, and for the first time in months, John knew justice might finally prevail. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread quickly through the community and beyond, and this wasn't just about John's property anymore. It was about holding the HOA and Karen accountable for a betrayal that had shaken the entire neighborhood to its core. John sat at the plaintiff's table, nerves mingling with a quiet determination. The coalition's legal team had prepared meticulously, armed with every piece of evidence he had risked his safety to obtain. But John knew the fight was far from over. Karen had lawyers with deep pockets and a reputation for ruthless tactics. The judge entered, and the courtroom fell silent. The trial began with opening statements from both sides. Karen's lawyer painted John as a disgruntled neighbor with a grudge, spinning a story that downplayed the forged documents and denied any wrongdoing. But then the coalition's lead attorney took the stand, presenting the mountain of evidence, financial records tracing illicit payments, forged signatures exposed by expert handwriting analysts, and the original deeds John had risked everything to secure. The turning point came when a surprise witness took the stand, Karen's former confidant, the anonymous woman who had come to John in the park. She testified about the secret meetings, the manipulation of boundary lines, and the pressure Karen exerted to silence dissenters. Karen's face drained of color. As the trial progressed, Karen's web of lies unraveled under the weight of facts and testimony. The judge declared the HOA's boundary changes null and void, restoring John's property rights and ordering the HOA to pay restitution to affected homeowners. But then came the unexpected twist. During the final moments of the trial, the judge revealed that an independent investigation into the HOA's finances had uncovered evidence not just of fraud, but of a much larger conspiracy involving several local officials colluding with the HOA board for personal gain. Karen was not the sole architect of the scheme. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. John felt a mixture of shock and vindication. The battle had exposed more than he ever imagined. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the coalition members, eager to hear their story. John's once quiet neighborhood was now a symbol of grassroots courage against corruption. Karen was arrested shortly after the trial on charges of fraud and conspiracy. Several officials resigned amid investigations. Though the victory was sweet, John knew the scars ran deep. Relationships had been tested, trust shattered. But the community was healing. Neighbors gathered for a block party weeks later, laughter and music filling the air, a stark contrast to the tension that had hung over their streets for so long. John raised a glass with Sarah, surrounded by their friends and allies. "This was never just about my property," John said quietly. "It was about standing up for what's right, no matter the odds," Sarah smiled, "and showing that even one person can make a difference." As the sun set over their restored neighborhood, John realized that justice wasn't just about winning a court case. It was about reclaiming hope and community. And sometimes the truth has a way of coming out, even from the darkest corners.